San Onofre's operators make it official, filing to restart the nuclear power plant. I'm Eric Anderson. The story tonight on KPBS Evening Edition.
We are the union! We are the union!
Labor leaders marched downtown to mark Cesar Chavez Day.
And at 2 weeks out from the deadline to file income taxes, the IRS and United Way offer a few tips for a bigger refund regardless of your tax bracket. Then, how a San Diego-based outreach program got an unusually high number of new citizens and ethnic voters to the polls. I'm Peggy Pico with those stories just ahead.
Also tonight, San Diego Unified's new superintendent gets ready to take the reins at the school district. And San Diegans get a rare look at a tale of faith, politics, and murder. KPBS Evening Edition starts now.
KPBS Evening Edition is made possible by Joan and Erwin Jacobs and by
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Dwayne Brown is off tonight. The operator of the San Onofre nuclear plant has submitted a draft request to restart the facility at 70% power. KPBS North County Bureau Chief Allison St. John is following the story. Allison, why does Southern California Edison need a license amendment to run that plant at 70% power?
Well, the current license lets it operate at 100% power, but because of problems with the steam generators, the company cannot guarantee that it can operate safely at 100% power for more than a year without a risk of tubes rupturing and leaking radioactivity. So its next strategy is to restart one reactor at 70% power for 5 months. Edison says it wants to restart before summer so that it can contribute to the electricity supply when peak demand hits. Now, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission says that would constitute a change in the license, so the company has applied for an amendment to do that.
Now, why restart at 70% power if the plant can't operate safely and permanently at 100%?
Well, that's the big question. I spoke with Ken Schultz, a retired nuclear engineer who is chair of the San Diego chapter of the American Nuclear Society, and he said Edison's strategy makes sense, assuming you're aiming to restart both reactors again eventually. And he says it's probably not a matter of fixing the existing steam generators, it's a matter of replacing them altogether. So he believes it's a good idea to generate at least some power while the company figures out who will pay to replace the faulty steam generators. Meanwhile, critics who oppose the restart, like the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility, for example, say, hold on a minute, someone needs to analyze whether it's going to be cost-effective to replace the generators. That's another $700 million to $1 billion, and the plant wouldn't come back online for 5 years. So they want the California Public Utilities Commission to speed up its ongoing analysis of whether this plant is really cost-effective for ratepayers. And then, of course, in the meantime, the NRC will consider Edison's license amendment request at a meeting on Wednesday in Maryland.
KPBS North County Bureau Chief Allison St. John. Allison, thank you. The search for a suspect in a Los Angeles kidnapping has spread to San Diego. Police say that Tobias Summers is their main suspect in the kidnapping of a 10-year-old girl last week. She was taken from her home and found 12 hours later. Police have arrested another man in the case. They say that Summers may have shaved his head. They're asking anyone who sees him to call 911. Prosecutors in Colorado say they'll seek the death penalty for James Holmes, the San Diego native accused of killing 12 people in a movie theater last summer. Holmes had offered to plead guilty in exchange for a life sentence. That offer rejected. The trial is now scheduled for February. 4 people have been arrested in a shooting that killed 2 teenagers at an Oceanside park. Last week we told you about the search for suspects in the shootings of 13-year-old Melanie Virgin and 15-year-old Edgar Sanchez. They were attacked at the site of a memorial for 2 other teens killed at Libby Lake Park. 3 adult suspects will appear in court on Wednesday. The 4th suspect is a juvenile. Today, union members and supporters marked Cesar Chavez Day by marching through downtown San Diego. Among their demands, common sense immigration reform. As Jill Replogle from our Fronteras desk reports, the legendary farm leader had a mixed record on immigration.
Union organizer Genoveva Aguilar helped kick off the march.
Our union has lost many of its good-spirited members because of immigration audits and E-Verify. Are we going to permit this? No!
Dozens of marchers held signs and wore T-shirts calling for immigration reform, including a path to citizenship for undocumented workers.
We are the union! We are the union!
But the labor movement has a mixed history on immigration. As head of the United Farm Workers Union, Chavez fought to keep out illegal immigrants willing to work for lower wages and replace striking workers. And labor has generally opposed guest worker programs. But the country's major unions and business groups recently agreed on the framework for a new guest worker program. The program would give visas to a limited number of low-skilled temporary workers each year based on market needs. Pay for these workers would have to be comparable to that of their American peers. At Monday's march, San Diego labor leader Lorena Gonzalez said the deal was historic.
Unless you allow folks who are here now, who have been here for decades working, to come out of the shadows and be able to assert their rights in the workplace, that we're dragging down the wages of all American workers.
And she said she thought if Cesar Chavez were alive, he'd be on board.
When we're looking at a future workflow, I think he'd be proud of what we've been able to establish the basic minimum of what workers will make as they come over. So we're not just bringing more and more and more immigrants to undercut American wages.
The bipartisan group of senators crafting an immigration reform bill is expected to present it in the coming weeks. Jill Replogle, KPBS News.
The city of Stockton is now the biggest city in the United States ever to go bankrupt. Stockton is in the San Joaquin Valley. It's got a population of about 300,000 people. It lost 70% of its tax base when the housing bubble burst and homes started going into foreclosure. The judge says that the bankruptcy allows Stockton to keep providing basic services. A new report says California doesn't do a good job of explaining how the state's money is spent. The state ranked 49th on a list comparing how states use the World Wide Web to help explain their finances. California scored 37 points out of 100 on the Follow the Money report. The report says the state's website lacked information and was tough to search. North Dakota was last with a 31. Texas had the best score. A San Diego-based outreach program reports an unusually high success rate for getting new citizens and ethnic voters to the polls. Peggy Pico explains how they did it and what it means to the future of campaigns.
Alliance San Diego, a nonpartisan voter engagement program, reports it mobilized 11% of San Diego voters in the November election. Here with further details on how this came about and what it means for other local elections are Chris Wilson, Director of Civic Engagement with Alliance San Diego, and Michael Odom, a UC San Diego graduate student and researcher of civil rights and political history. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Chris, how many people did the Alliance reach out to and how'd they do it?
Well, we reached out to more than 75,000 voters, and we used a predictive dialing system, which is a modern-day phone banking operation. We also did door-to-door knocking, robocalls. We had, very prominent people in the community record calls, and we contacted voters that way. And then lastly, we did a mailer.
Which did you find most effective?
Most effective are the door-to-door conversations. When you have a person talking to a person face-to-face who looks like them, speaks their same language, we're able to build a rapport with the voters.
Now, how were you able to track that the people that you talked to actually voted?
Well, we use Political Data Incorporated. It's a voter data system that allows us to create a universe of voters and then go back and input data after we have a conversation, and it tracks the data for us.
Let's take a little look at this numbers. The analysis you had of the engagement program found that in November 2012 election that 81% of the people that ASD reached out to and talked to voted compared to 72% of the new citizens citywide. When it came to U.S.-born, 82% that you reached out to voted compared to 76%. And if we break that out further by ethnicity, an 85% turnout of African Americans that you contacted
Yes.
versus 69%, among Latinos 77% compared to 65%, and among Asian and Filipinos 77% compared to 69%. Now, Michael, these may not seem like huge differences in numbers, but comparatively, historically, how big of a deal is this for San Diego?
Well, for San Diego, comparatively, we haven't seen this sort of mobilization of students, a sort of a multiracial coalition, and San Diego's working class since the 1960s. So for about 40 to 50 years, San Diego hasn't seen this sort of mobilization.
Why do you think this is important for the voters and for the candidates?
Well, this is important for the voters as well as for the candidates because what we see historically is that 70% of San Diego's voting population has been Caucasian, whereas only 49% of San Diego's eligible voters are Caucasian. So that essentially leaves about 20% of people who have been disfranchised and
Well, Chris, what do you think is going to keep this moving forward? Do you have something lined up?
Yes, we plan not to just be an organization who contacts voters every 4 years around election time. We want to be an organization that is constantly engaging voters and residents to make a difference in San Diego and build the San Diego that we all know we want to live in.
And Ray, Michael, what does it take? What do you think it's going to take to keep this momentum going, to keep these underrepresented historically people coming to the polls, going to the polls, and being engaged?
Well, a strong mobilization effort. I think engaging students and student activists in things such as summer internships and educational programs, as well as on the ground grassroots mobilization efforts by groups like this Alliance San Diego, as well as candidates in other organizations locally.
All right, we have links to your organization on our website, kpbs.org. Thank you both so much for talking with me.
Thank you for having us.
Big changes this week for Cindy Marten, from school principal to training to become San Diego Unified's next superintendent. KPBS education reporter Kyla Calvert has that story.
Oh, I love when you sing to me.
Wherever Cindy Marten goes on the bright Central Elementary campus, children flock to her. They throw their arms around her, and if they're too late to the throng to hug her, they clamor for a moment of her attention.
Are you going to sing it for me?
They're planning an elaborate goodbye for her the next morning. It's supposed to be a surprise, but they can't help telling her they've been making cards.
I made your card. When do I get to see it? Okay.
I don't know.
You didn't write me a letter?
I did.
Okay, good.
Marten has spent 10 years at Central, and she's done more than win her students' adoration.
I'm going to miss you, too.
She came to the school from Poway Unified and started as a first-grade teacher.
It was 18% proficiency at that point. It was about 2 kids in every room who were meeting standards. 2 children in every classroom. So I actually changed my paradigm around how are we going to support children when there are very few models of what proficiency looks like, what an active, engaged learner looks like.
Every student at Central comes from a low-income household. 85% are learning English as a second language. Today, more than twice as many are passing the state English tests compared to when Marten arrived, and nearly 20% more are passing in math. But Marten says there's no magic at work here.
Children who come from poverty, or children who come from homes where English isn't the first language, or there's low education levels at home, or children who come from struggle, whatever that struggle may be, can achieve and achieve at high levels, can learn and learn well, given the right support systems and structures from research-based practices.
Researchers at San Diego State's Center for Urban School Transformation agree. They say successful urban schools share several characteristics. Those include effective teaching that engages students, rigorous curriculum, and positive relationships. All of those things are on display in teacher Jeremiah Atienza's 5th grade class. Despite his students' different levels of English, Atienza found a way to reach them.
A lot of our children are struggling, but these children can learn rap. If these children can learn rap, then they can learn how to read, write, and do everything else.
The final element researchers say they see at high-performing urban schools is high-quality leadership. Transitional kindergarten teacher Michael Stanley says leadership is exactly what took Central from being a school with high teacher turnover to one with a stable staff.
She really fought to keep teachers here and to keep our class sizes low, and that has made people want to stay. If she's willing to do that for us, we're willing to work for her and hopefully see that test score increase.
Smaller class sizes and partnering with local organizations to build a 5-day-a-week health clinic at the school are a couple of the things Marten says Central needed to help students be more successful. But she's not going to tell other school leaders that they need the same things.
Communities each know what best the children in that community need to be able to do well. So that's kind of a grassroots effort, right? And the part about a grassroots effort that's difficult is if it's all grassroots and there's no support from the top, you end up with inequities.
Making an elementary school principal the superintendent of one of the country's largest school districts is highly unusual. Researchers say the job calls for different skills, and she'll have to lean on the experience of her new staffers. Still, Marten says with the state overhauling curriculum and testing under new national standards, her classroom perspective will be key.
It's an amazing opportunity to have an instructional focus be the center of our district again.
Marten's signature message at Central is work hard, be kind, dream big, no excuses. And Jeremiah Atienza says the central office staff are in for an intense experience under those guidelines.
She looks at every piece of paper with meticulous care. I've never seen anyone do that. It's very scary to have a boss like her, but it's very necessary. That's why if your heart is in the right place and you want to show the world that you can make a difference, you will. And she's that teacher to help you find it.
Soon the city will see if Marten's message carries the same power outside the walls of Central Elementary.
I'm not going to say goodbye.
Don't say goodbye. We'll say see you later.
Kyla Calvert, KPBS News.
Now, this may be April Fool's Day, but this next story, not a joke. Next weekend, San Diego Mayor Bob Filner gets a special award for injecting humor into politics. Really, not a joke. It's part of an annual conference for the Association of Applied and Therapeutic Humor. The organizers say that Filner is an extremely smiley mayor, so they're going to give him an award, and his office says he will be there to accept it. No joke there at all. Not much laughter today in the San Diego Padres dugout. The Padres opening the season in New York, losing to the Mets 11-2. Third baseman Chase Headley did not play. He's out for a couple of months with a fractured thumb. The Padres' home opener is April 9th. Business is booming for companies making unmanned drones, but a privacy backlash could ground them. Tonight, we begin a two-part look at the push to expand the drone industry in San Diego. We begin with Tom Ritchie of the Associated Press.
This is a drone flying in a controlled space. And this is what a drone sees as it flies down a street near you. There is little doubt that unmanned aerial vehicle systems are here to stay.
So they basically become cheap and easy and potentially ubiquitous.
Generally under 25 pounds, drones will soon monitor hurricanes, deliver targeted pesticide applications, and check miles of oil pipeline in a day. But under what rules will they fly? And is your privacy adequately protected?
When we're talking about privacy, we need to make sure that we're talking about the bigger picture of privacy. You know, there are cameras that are mounted on buildings that are stationary. So again, when we talk about privacy, we need to not single out unmanned aircraft.
With low cost and ease of use, drones are attractive to police departments for aerial intelligence gathering. They can fly with high-powered cameras, microphones, and even infrared systems that see in the dark. With all this technology, lawyers suggest that Americans may soon be subject to increasing levels of invasive surveillance.
It's going to open up parts of their lives that they previously thought were private, not only on an individual level, like I'm going to the store or I'm going to work today, but allow law enforcement and government to really put those pieces together and to do persistent tracking at a level that we previously just weren't aware of.
At present, police departments can operate drones only with FAA permission. But this hasn't stopped the growing concern that police may abuse the technology. And now, because of public backlash, the industry fears it may be grounded.
They're really no different than manned platforms. So when you're talking about public safety use, police have been using helicopters for years.
Some fear law enforcement may be able to combine your Facebook page, Google information, along with drone surveillance and create a 360-degree look at your life. The industry counters that weight limitations will make such persistent aerial surveillance impossible. FAA rules governing drones are required by September 2015, but the agency is behind schedule and probably won't make the deadline. Even still, analysts predict there will be some 7,000 drones in commercial airspace by the end of the decade. Tom Ritchie, Associated Press.
Later this week, activists plan anti-drone protests at some local companies. Tomorrow night, we'll have a look at the business side of the drone debate. Supporters of the drone industry say it could mean scores of new jobs for San Diego. Are your taxes done yet? The deadline is just 2 weeks away. The IRS says the average refund is about $2,800. Peggy Pico gets some tips for last-minute filers.
It's probably fair to say that most, if not all of us, are looking for ways to keep more of the money we earn, from filing tax extensions to earned income tax credit for low-income earners. We've got tax filing tips that may help you get a bigger refund. Joining me with details are Rafael Tolino with the IRS for Southern California and Nevada, and Shayna Gross with the United Way of San Diego County. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Rafael, we're about 2 weeks out
Yep.
from the deadline. Is there still time to file a tax extension?
Yeah, of course. You can file for an extension all the way up to the deadline, and there's two ways to do it: by paper or electronically through your software. It gives you 6 months to do it through October 15th. However, it's an extension of time to file and not to pay. So if you owe or you think you owe, April 15th is your deadline. Otherwise, you risk penalties or interest that can accrue on your account. That said, the majority, up over 80% of all returns are refund returns. So
who benefits most from an extension?
Those who are probably putting it off, or those who aren't getting the paperwork they need based on their situation to take that extension. You don't want to file an inaccurate return, so if you need that extra time, by all means take it.
But pay what
if you owe. If you have the
know what
balance
you owe.
due, then certainly pay something. That way you avoid anything else that could have tacked on.
Before we move to Sheena, what's the turnaround time right now? You said 80% are going to get refunds. What's the turnaround?
Refunds for the majority of taxpayers about 10 to 21 days. That's what we're seeing in terms. And the quickest way is to e-file, choose direct deposit, do a paperless tax return, and that affords you the least amount of time for the money to show up in your account.
Yeah, it worked for me. I got mine surprisingly quick this year. Sheena, the earned income tax credit is meant for moderate to low income tax people. Who qualifies for this credit and how much will they get?
It's created for working low to middle income individuals and families. So anyone that has a household income of about $50,000 or less is eligible for the credit. It varies depending on how much money you make and how many children or dependents you have, but you can get up to over $5,800.
This is sort of an underused, I guess, or under-recognized, I think, by a lot of people who file their taxes. United Way, you're trying to do things to change that. What are you doing?
Well, we focus on the working hard but falling short, and the people that are eligible for the earned income tax credit certainly fall there. So we have over 100 sites around the county, 20 different agency partners that are offering free tax preparation and that will make sure that you claim the earned income tax credit if you're eligible.
How can people find out more about this?
You can go to call 211. You can go on the United Way website so to find a list of all of the different locations that are available.
And specifically in the community, you're reaching out to disabled people through the Goodwill?
Yeah, over the last 2 years, one of the things that we learned is that the people with disabilities are working, but maybe not earning enough where they are required to file taxes. But if they were to file, they would be eligible for the earned income tax credit. So that seems to be a population that was really missing out on this credit.
Okay. And Rafael, speaking of missing out, a lot of people don't file, or I should say at least some don't file, or they delay filing because they say they can't afford it. What sort of programs are with the IRS to help these people who say, I can't pay my bill right now?
The IRS began a posture about 3-4 years ago. We realized a lot of folks are in a position where they owe and they can't full pay. Do file a return, do pay. There's an installment agreement you can apply for that's much more flexible in terms of what it used to be, offering compromise programs. Bottom line is this: we will work with you if you're in that position. We have to know about it, so be proactive. Do file the return, do pay something if you're in that position, and let's work with you from there. And then one other thing I have to say is we also work on base, the volunteer sites for VITA and EITC. Miramar, Pendleton, all the base sites around too for military members and armed forces members. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that because it's so indigenous to San Diego.
Right, so. And I think don't be afraid, right? Don't be afraid that they contact you. You have programs out there, both of you. Rafael, last question is scams. It's tax time. You hear people advertising, gee, let us help you spend your tax refund before you even get it. What are the big ones we should watch out for?
Well, an email in your inbox, not the IRS. We're not initiating contact out of the blue. And the other thing is, if something just sounds like it's too good to be true, chances are it probably is. So just be vigilant out there and be careful with your information. It's really important.
Alrighty. I want to let people know that they can get links to both of your websites and for help on tax tips on our website, kpbs.org. Thank you both so much for talking with us.
Thanks for having me.
The murder of Archbishop Thomas Becket back in 1170 has been portrayed on stage and screen, and it's the basis of a rarely performed opera called Murder in the Cathedral, making its West Coast premiere right here in San Diego. KPBS arts reporter Beth Accomando gives us a preview.
For their latest production, the San Diego Opera tackles the rarely produced Murder in the Cathedral, which looks to the murder of Archbishop Thomas Becket at the hands of King Henry II's knights.
We wanted to give the idea of the inside of a church, but when the audience comes in, the first thing they'll see is a stained glass window, and on that window are both Becket and King Henry II. We have what we call the show cloth. This rises, and we see the depth of the cathedral inside.
A key element to Ildebrando Pizzetti's opera is the female chorus.
The women will always be there, because at the end of their first scene they say, "We are condemned only to watch." They know they can't do anything about the events that they have a premonition about. And since they're condemned to watch, I'm going to have them watching.
Watching from the imposing steps of Canterbury Cathedral, Ralph Funicello's production design captures the grand scale of the cathedral with its stained glass windows and massive pillars. But designing for opera can be very different from designing for a stage play.
As I've always said, you're designed for the music in an opera. I mean, there's the story and the plot and all of that, but what really keys into what the scale and the emotional feeling of the design is really comes more from the music than anything.
This 1958 opera is based on T.S. Eliot's poetic drama Murder in the Cathedral, which uses Beckett's murder to address issues of religion, politics, and an individual's opposition to authority.
We must remember that when he died, a cult of Becket developed, and it became so powerful that the king, in a sense, had to surrender to it and come to the Becket tomb and pay penance. Even though he says he didn't order the knights to kill him, he knew he had publicly to accept a kind of responsibility.
The opera deals with themes that Campbell says still resonate today. Beth Accomando, KPBS News.
And good evening.